think we're good.
All right, I think we're live. We'll get going here in just a minute as a few folks join. We won't go very long tonight. YouTube is giving us an 8-hour time limit, so we should be out of here by midnight pretty easily tonight, I think. Hopefully you guys don't have any other plans tonight.
No, our girls are in bed, so.
No weather baby on tonight?
The weather baby is now 2 years old and acting like the GFS.
Is it acting like the GFS at 12 hours or at 384 hours?
All the
Yes.
the 6Z and 18Z.
Yeah.
Yeah, those middle runs, definitely. All right, I'm trying to see if we're live here on the stream. That's why I'm looking off to the left.
And it probably depends on what day and what time of day which model she's behaving like too.
Yes, especially no naps.
Oh.
Yeah, there it is. Okay, cool. I got an error there for a minute when I refreshed the YouTube stream, but everything looks okay. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Good evening, everybody. My name is Erik Proseus, MemphisWeather.net meteorologist. Glad to have those of you with us tonight. And if you're watching this on a playback, I hope you'll watch it in about a week and see how this weekend pans out as we discuss it tonight. You can come back and tell us how we did. But a lot of things to talk about tonight. We're going to hold this to about an hour, but haven't done one of these in quite a while, and so I wanted to take the opportunity to talk a little bit about some winter weather. We have a pretty major system coming in this weekend that ought to provide quite the excitement here in the Mid-South, whether it's just temperatures or maybe precip too. We'll talk about that a little bit. And then we'll have some other topics to talk about, some things going on in the realm of the National Weather Service that could have some effects on the general public as well. We want to talk about that just a little bit too. But first, before we get too much further, I want to introduce my compadres for tonight. They're no strangers to MWN Hangouts. I'm glad to welcome back your host of Tigers tonight. It's not hosting tonight. We're doing weather chat. John Maddox, how are you tonight?
I'm good, thank you. It feels weird, and like I said on Twitter, it's been a couple weeks since I've done a Tigers Tonight, so it was a crazy football season, and but hey, thanks to you guys, we had great weather every week this year. No real bad. I think it was cold once and really hot once, but other than that, it was perfect.
Yeah, quite different from the last couple of years. We've had rain washouts almost, and thunderstorms dealing with.
Yeah, last year we had 5 of 7 home dates had some sort of rain, so much better this year.
Yeah, yep. And of course the Tigers did just as well, I'd say, comparably speaking, and look forward to Boca Raton, where I hear it's always great. No forecasters needed down there in South Florida, and maybe that's what the Weather Service is thinking. I don't know. We'll talk about that a little later. Moving over one more slot, Daniel Gafford, father of weather toddler, and another regular here. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, good to have you on again tonight. So we're going to jump right in here, and I apologize for my focus there going in and out. That's a little weird. Actually, it's kind of Twilight Zone-ish. But I think what we'll start off doing is taking a quick look at the forecast for the next several days and kind of talk about this weekend system. We were kind of come out of a cold blast that we had late last week, Arctic blast that moved down through the Midwest and into the Mid-South and off the East Coast. Northern tier of the U.S. continues to be really cold, and basically we're just kind of getting impulses coming down out of Canada, another little wave of cold air, and it pushes all of that down a little bit further south, and we get on kind of the southern edge of that cold air and have another one of those actually coming through here over the next couple of days. We were up around 50 today, but tomorrow it's going to be back in the mid-40s and then down in the mid-30s. So we're going downhill going into the weekend. And of course, it always warms up when it gets ready to precipitate here in the Mid-South. And so that's what's going to happen this weekend until the bottom falls out again. So I'm going to screen share here if this works for me. Let's see, we're going to do that one and go straight here, and we will start off. A model of choice for tonight is the repugnant GFS 18Z run, the one we never like to look at, I guess, but it is the latest data, and it seems to be pretty well in line with some of the other things we've been looking at. over the last 24 hours or so. So this is the picture basically this evening. National picture. We've got great big Arctic high pressure sprawled out over the plains up into the Midwest, and definitely some very cold air coming in. Chicago's going to be getting down to about 0 tonight. Just that gives you an idea of exactly how cold that is. We've got stalled out front to our south. There was kind of a weak front that moved through late this afternoon. We had quite a bit of fog and stuff around this morning. A little different to see at low clouds and fog sticking around well into the day today. Ceilings down around 300 feet or so into the early afternoon, which is quite unusual. But that was this front kind of on the leading edge of this high pressure dropped off to the south. That kind of cleared us out. So this is the current picture, and we'll just kind of fast forward here. And basically, as we go through this, we're jumping forward 6 hours at a time. And if my computer will keep up with me, we'll watch it go through. Come on. We're not moving. And isn't that interesting? How about if I just refresh the browser? We'll start all over again. Get this set up one more time. Sorry about that. We are on a site called Weather Bell, which is one of my favorites for looking at some really nice graphics, a lot of nice zoom levels and so forth, a lot of different parameters we can look at in all the various models. Here we go. So as we go through here, you see that this is going into tomorrow, and here's the high pressure coming down from Canada. I think that first picture was actually probably a frozen picture, not correct for this evening. And there it is stalling on me again. There we go. So here's as we move into Thursday, that high settles down over the Midwest. Really cold air up there. You see the freezing line dropping down. As far as Thursday morning, it's going to be well to our south. This is really slow tonight. Sorry, guys. There we go. Freezing line down across basically the I-20 corridor, right down through about Birmingham. So we're going to be cold on Thursday morning. And then as we head out, going towards the weekend, this should be moving every time I advance this frame, and it's really not. Tell you what, we're going to do one other thing here. Just want to make this easier for everybody to watch, and so instead of going
Everyone
through,
take note of his bookmarks, all
take
of his
note of the
tabs.
bookmarks, right? Yes, yes, of course. And I'm going to do 6-hour QPF. I wonder if my bandwidth is just getting hosed by all these things that I have running. Maybe it's what it is. Yep, we'll go with this one here. Not quite as fancy, but all right, this is going into Friday morning, and you see a storm system out in the west. It's going to be starting to move across the northern plains. This is all snow. This is where I really like those other graphics better, because I get rain and snow. I'm going to try and keep with this because this is just what I like better. It wasn't working. Friday night, showers moving in, and basically what we've got here going Friday is southerly flow starting to come back up ahead of this low pressure out over the plains. This is going to set the stage for a giant warm-up as we head into Saturday. Basically have some kind of warm advection showers, we call these, but basically you've just got warm air that's being funneled up the Mississippi River Valley here. So very light showers heading into late Friday afternoon, 20-30% chance, really not a whole lot to worry about. You see the freezing line going well north of us. So I really don't expect any issues with freezing precipitation then. And as we go into the overnight hours, you see that low by Saturday morning gets up to about St. Louis, and it's really picking up all this moisture down to the south. As we go further, a little farther into the day, you see now basically the cold front is right back through this area, and we are in the warm sector of this system. And if we take a look at the maximum temperatures, this is at the same time. This is Saturday afternoon. You can see these oranges in here are well into the 60s, in fact, approaching 70 degrees by Saturday afternoon. So definitely some very warm air, southerly winds out ahead of that. And then as we head into the overnight hours, this is around 6 p.m., so it looks like showers breaking out, a little bit more likely for rain as we head into the later hours on Saturday. And then as we go into Saturday night, you see the precipitation really picks up, especially just to our east. But we should get a pretty good amount of rain on Saturday evening. But you notice here, this is midnight Saturday night. You can barely see it right here. Let me actually zoom in right to the Memphis Metro here so we can see this a little bit closer. we're going to take a look at the same time frame zoomed into Memphis. So this is the precipitation between 6 p.m. and midnight, and we're looking at half an inch or a little bit more in that 6-hour period. Here is the freezing line right here, dropping down into northern Tennessee, Missouri Boot Heel, northern Arkansas. So you see how close that is to this precipitation. And by the time we get to 6 a.m. Sunday, freezing line has dropped to the south of us, according to this model. Still a little bit of light precipitation on the backside. I am going to back this out just a little bit more so we can see this again from a little bit bigger picture there. This is the Arkansas view. Here's Memphis right here. So there is some precipitation back behind this system. And if I change this over to precipitation type, you're going to see a lot of rain out ahead of the cold air. This orangish colors are miss ice pellets or sleet, and this is a band of snow that is set up, and this would be falling during the overnight hours Saturday night. And as we head into the morning hours on Sunday, precipitation moves off to the east. You see that freezing line doesn't come back north like it normally would during the daytime hours. It actually continues to sink south. And as we head into late in the day on Sunday, that freezing line now well to the south of us. What this is telling you is basically that our temperatures are going to be steady or falling during the day on Sunday. Let's take a look at those temperatures. Drop back up here. So this is a close-in view. Let me go back to Memphis here. Not Madison. It's very cold in Madison. There we go. This is Saturday, 6 p.m. This model is showing us temperatures in the mid-60s. By midnight, 37. By 6 a.m., 28. And 30 at noon, 25 at 6 p.m. on Sunday. Looks like we're going to stay below freezing all day on Sunday. And then as we head into the overnight hours, this is the forecast for Monday morning. And fortunately, most of the kids are out of school next week, Monday morning, but temperatures around 17 for the morning low on Monday morning. So definitely a big drop in temperatures. And you can see that front moving right across the Mid-South. This is, again, midnight Saturday night. 60s in Northeast Mississippi, 30s over the Memphis metro. So this is definitely a big blast of Arctic air that's going to be moving in. So as far as precipitation, what are we thinking that we might be dealing with? Well, let me switch over here. And this is what I actually have in the forecast for this week. So we'll start the first couple of days. Cooling trend, as I mentioned, about 5 degrees cooler tomorrow than it was today. Thursday, we'll see more sun. Looks like we'll see highs, though, only in the 30s. This will be similar to like last Friday. We had temperatures in the 20s in the morning, 38 in the afternoon. Friday will start to warm up. That morning low of 26. I don't expect precipitation that early in the morning when it's that cold. And then the warm front will be moving north. So we'll warm up to about 48 for the afternoon high. That's about the 6 p.m. temperature is what I'm guessing for Friday afternoon, and showers increasing as we go into the night. And then for Saturday, you see the low Saturday is 48. That's actually kind of like the Friday night high, Saturday morning low, basically the same thing. I think temperatures are going to surge overnight on Friday night. When you wake up Saturday morning, they could be around 60 and then climbing even more to, I've got 70 on here. And I'll tell you, I have looked at a couple of models that have not ruled out near record temperatures in the mid 70s on Saturday. That's going to depend on how much rainfall we get during the day. But I think 70 is a pretty safe bet right now. And then as you see on Sunday, the bottom falls out of it. We're staying down around 30 to 32 pretty much all day long. In fact, that high of 32 could be in the morning. We could be in the 20s in the afternoon. And as far as the precipitation changeover, the problem with the Mid-South, of course, as always, is that the precipitation moves out as the cold air moves in, and we end up getting, you know, maybe a flurry, something like that on the backside, or nothing, or the precipitation is just gone by the time the temperatures get cold enough for winter precip. There are a few hints that may there might be still some lingering precip showing by the time the cold air moves in, because this cold air is really going to dive in fast. And so if we go back and look at this one more time here, this is the precipitation between midnight and 6 a.m. Sunday, and there is some lingering precip back behind in the colder air where I have forecast temperatures around 30. So we could see a little bit of light snow possible on Sunday morning. Again, it's too far out to say for sure. The trend, as always in the Mid-South, is for that to move out before the precip before the cold air gets here. But the fact that we've got a little bit of light snow back here on the backside, in fact, the 6-hour snowfall total here, if we take a quick look at that, we're showing northern Arkansas is going to get, that's probably a couple of inches back up there if this model pans out. Yep, about 1 to 2 inches up over the north central and up towards the Ozark here in northwestern Arkansas. So it's not showing anything for us. We're kind of in between that band back there and the precip moving out. Don't know if that band's actually going to set up. That's too far out to say for sure. So that's kind of what we're looking at for this weekend. It ought to be real interesting to see how that plays out. You guys have any comments on that besides how do we dress?
Looks like it's going to be pretty windy too, especially on Saturday before the front gets here, those southerly winds. So tie down Santa Claus and Rudolph so he doesn't end up in the neighbor's yard.
Yeah, that's a
Yep. And this isn't really the ideal severe weather scenario either. You see 70 in December, you think bells and whistles going off for severe weather, but not really. The other pattern you want for us to get that.
Yeah, a lot of the other parameters that you certainly have a lot of, with 70 degrees, you're going to have a fair amount of instability in the air. But that with the, from the big picture view that I showed, the low pressure is just so far to the north. It really is going up through the Great Lakes by the time that front comes through. So we're losing a lot of the dynamics of the system that are generated by that low. And so definitely have a possibility of some thunder in there as that front rolls through here Saturday evening. It's gonna pack quite a punch, so definitely could see some thunder. But right now, the severe weather threat is not that great. I will take a quick look because the SPC is actually taking a look at that already too. Let me go back here and pull up the day 5.
Yeah, and I would think that that Sunday is probably going to be Saturday, Sunday, probably a pretty good travel day too. So points, especially north and east, are going to have to, because this storm's really going to crank up once it gets out of the Mid-South. Absolutely.
Yep. And a lot of really cold air on the backside of it too. So some snows up in the Midwest, definitely a possibility. If you're going to be flying maybe on Sunday, that might be a day you certainly want to kind of keep in touch with the weather around the country and, check with the airlines if you have any questions. This is the severe weather outlook for Saturday during the day. 15% risk, which basically equates to a slight risk on day 5. We'll be keeping a close eye on that too. Right now, it's down a little bit closer to where more of the instability and definitely some higher dew points where we'll have some a little bit more bubbly air down there to the south, where there could be a damaging wind threat would be the primary risk with this. With the low going so far to the north, the tornado threat would be fairly minimal, but could see a squall line down to our southwest moving through that area on Saturday, and that could pose a risk for some damaging winds down there. So that's going to be definitely something to keep an eye on as well as we get each day a little bit closer. You can stay tuned here with us, and we'll, of course, be giving you the latest information on that, latest forecasts, and all of that good stuff throughout the week as well. And we will have a blog on that in the next couple of days here, too. So we'll turn from that because obviously we've had, this early midweek period, we have kind of our second blast of cold air with 30s for highs. We've got the third one coming up next week, Sunday into early next week. And so why don't we take the opportunity to take a quick look at what NOAA is thinking as far as their winter outlook. I did not do a MWN winter outlook this year. I have done them the last few years and honestly just didn't have enough time or inclination to get it done this year. And NOAA's doing a pretty good job, and I was going to pretty much mimic what they would have said anyway. And so we're going to go with what NOAA's put out. It's from the National Weather Service, the winter outlook that covers basically now through early March. And this is basically the pattern from a global perspective that we're in, at least as far as kind of our teleconnections are concerned, is a very weak La Nina, and that's actually expected to go back to kind of a neutral phase by the end of this winter. There was some thought that we might get a stronger La Nina going into this winter, which would have promoted perhaps a little bit better risk of some severe weather and stuff late in the winter. But it looks like it's fairly benign as far as the La Nina is concerned, kind of in that La Nina phase, which is between El Nino and La Nina. And this is kind of what how the weather typically plays out in that type of scenario. As far as precipitation is concerned, typically that means that we've got the wetter conditions across the northern part of the country, especially in the northern Rockies up into southwestern Canada there, and across the south, more dry conditions. We've certainly kind of been feeling that drought for the last few months, in the fall especially, but as we go into the winter, we started to get more systems moving through here, dropping some more rainfall. We'll probably end up fairly close to normal for December, which has been a definite plus. We've needed the rainfall. But if this pans out, it looks like we could be looking at more of a dry condition across the southern tier of the country for the wintertime, December, January, February. And of course, we know the major drought that's going on down in the southeast. We're kind of on the northern fringes, northwestern fringes of that. But areas from the western Carolinas into Georgia, Birmingham, the Alabama, Mississippi area, they definitely could use a pretty good wet winter to help with that. And right now, not necessarily in the cards. And then as far as the temperatures are concerned, this is what NOAA has predicted for the winter: dry and warm across the southern tier of the country, and cooler weather more likely up to the north. Now, I will tell you that I've looked at a couple of other winter outlooks that are out there, and they don't necessarily agree with this. Especially from a temperature trend. One of them that I tend to put a fair amount of stock in, it seems to indicate that perhaps this area in the northern plains will be colder, but that will spill over into the eastern half of the country as well. And we're kind of starting to see that trend here in December as we get these cold blasts coming down out of Canada and dropping into the eastern U.S. here. And so December is kind of starting that way. I will say that the kind of the long-term trends for weeks, say 3 through 5, this would be, or 2 through 4, maybe starting around Christmas time into early January, indicates a warm up along the eastern half of the country, and perhaps into January a ways. So, we're comparing basically an outlook from NOAA that was produced a month or so ago with some of the more long-term models that still stay within that 30-day period, which kind of tend to refine some of this data. So what does that mean? It could mean a coin flip, basically, for our area of the country. If the NOAA outlook pans out, we would be warmer than average for the winter, and kind of right on the edge of the drier than normal, kind of what they call equal chances, which means we got basically equal chances of being above or below normal precipitation wise. And of course, I always caveat winter outlooks with, it doesn't matter if they're going to say it's warm and dry in the Mid-South this winter. All it takes is one system that comes through with one cold blast and the right amount of moisture at the right time, and we get a season's worth of snowfall in a few hours, because basically our average snowfall for the year is about one snowfall. It's about 3 inches. So if we don't get any, that just means we didn't get that particular event to happen. And if we get 5 inches of snow and we double our normal, it means we probably got 2 of those systems instead of 1. So it's a little bit more difficult than it is up north, where they average 30, 40 inches of snow, and several systems add up to produce that. So what are your guys' thoughts on the winter outlook this year? What are you hoping for?
How's your snow dome, John?
Well, the Fayette County contingent is strong. Let's just put it that way. I've worked on it all summer. I think that winter forecasting, we say this every year, it seems like, is probably more difficult in this stretch of land than it is anywhere else. And, NOAA kind of precipitates that, pardon the pun, with the equal chances of, that. But it's like you said, it just, I think Patrick Marsh said famously once, the worst tornado is the one that hits your house. So that's, the same thing goes with winter storms. You're absolutely right, Eric. It just takes one ice storm 94 to be generational, and, or one big snowfall to basically, and then everybody goes, oh, well, the outlook was wrong. Well, no, generally the outlook was right, but it just takes that one storm to change everything.
Yep, and one storm does not make a season, of course, either. And so you can end up with a warmer than normal winter when you average out 3 months, and have cold blasts in there that they give you temperatures in the teens overnight, or even a little bit lower, and highs in the 30s. And it is a little bit a little atypical to see 3 kind of very cold systems that move in and give us highs in the 30s during December. Typically, our coldest weather, occurs in mid-January to early February. And as most of you know that have lived here for any period of time, a lot of times our best snows actually come in February to the first weekend in March. I could count. Probably fill up one hand with the number of times in the last 10 to 15 years where we've gotten a pretty decent snow, decent for here. Between March 1st and 8th. It always seems to work out that way. And of course, that's when you can still get those pretty good cold fronts that move through that have pretty good Arctic air behind them, or at least some modified Arctic air that gets you cold enough. And by, of course, that time of year, we're starting to get some Gulf moisture coming back as well. And so the moisture levels tend to be higher in early March than they do, say, in the middle of January, when dew points are down in the 10 to 15 range versus 28, which certainly will give you a better chance of snow, or accumulating snow.
Yeah, it takes a very specific set of circumstances for us to actually get snow. If the low's too far north, it's, as John likes to say, 33 and rain. If it's too far south, Alabama gets the snow. I mean, the track has to be spot on.
Yeah, and it really can go either direction from us. We're in a part of the country where you can. I've heard many a complaint of, why does North Mississippi always get the snow? Why does Dyersburg always get the snow? Well, luck of the draw, but it can go either direction from us. It depends on where that moisture sets up, and you'll hear us talk about it this winter. What is the track of the low? Where is it going? Because that'll define where the cold air is and where the moisture is. So
we had a situation a couple years ago, I think it was, I can't remember, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, where it literally rained like 3 or 4 inches at my house in Fayette County and stayed at 33 degrees all night. And Nick Helms, who lives in Arlington, it was 31 degrees and rained a couple inches up there. So, and I mean, we're probably less than 10 miles apart. So, it's so hard and so funny, and it'll look one way, and then suddenly the low makes a right-hand turn or a left-hand turn, and we don't get anything. So
yep, exactly. And of course, now that we have 3 flyovers on top of each other, I'm sure it'll be a terrible winter. And we'll all be cursing the fact that we can now drive without slowing down on the flyovers until we get a couple hundredths of an inch of freezing rain, and then we'll all be jacked up again and looking for how to get in on Walnut Grove. So anyway, that's sometimes that's the way it goes. All right. So speaking of winter weather and some of the products that the Weather Service issues, of course, we use the Weather Service's watch, warning, and advisory type of criteria to provide the kind of the alerts on what type of weather to expect and how bad it's going to be and so forth. It's kind of interesting and probably long overdue that the Weather Service is taking a look at revising those criteria and trying to simplify the process a little bit. I'm going to flip over here. The Weather Service has a set of criteria that basically allow them to show 122 different types of watches and warnings. And this is, I can scroll down, they all have their own color, believe it or not, because if you look at the map, you need to know what type of watch or warning or advisory you're under. So they all have some shade of some different color. This is all of the possible watches, warnings, and advisories the Weather Service can issue. It is extensive. And there's been a lot of, now that they're talking more and more about the use of social media and communicating, the ability to communicate the hazards and the impacts to the general public. It's one thing to say there's a winter storm warning. It's another thing for the public to comprehend that and know exactly what does that mean to me? How should I react to that? What kind of precautions should I take? And well, we have a winter storm warning, so you should know what that means. Well, not necessarily. And so there's a lot more discussion about how do we make sure that the public is well prepared and making decisions that will put them in the best possible place to take precautions as necessary, to prepare as necessary. And part of that process is a reconsideration of the watch, warning, advisory criteria. And basically, they kind of started this a couple years ago, but have been doing some studies lately. They've been doing a lot of surveys and interviews of the public, decision makers like the EMA offices, and talking to others who make decisions based on these things to figure out what's the best way to go about this. And they basically have kind of have two different tracks that are possible. One is a repair the system, and one is a revamp the system. Repair is basically a way to just kind of make some tweaks to change things just a little bit here and there to try and make the system a little better without totally throwing it in the trash can and starting all over, which would require not only a huge educational effort, but all of the technology that's involved of basically rewriting the system would be a pretty big undertaking. The other way of doing that is the revamp, which is kind of doing that. It's basically throwing the baby out with the bathwater and saying, let's try this again. So they're going down the process right now of deciding which way to go, gathering the feedback and so forth. The first things they want to start off with, though, that they're doing some surveys and so forth on right now is the flood warnings, the flood products, and the winter weather products. So for example, I think I've got here, there's a study that they're doing. Yeah, here, I'll screen share this so you can take a look. I am on the National Weather Service website here and looking at their hazard simplification system. This is their website that's about it. So if you want to look more on this, and there are actually surveys that the public can take too. You can kind of go through a couple of examples of weather systems and the products that the Weather Service does issue and would issue under a new system, and you can kind of provide your feedback on what you think about it. But this is all under weather.gov/hazard simplification. And this is one of them that under the kind of the repair category that describes something that they're considering, and one of the options here for a repair for the repair track. So if you see right here, flood advisories. There basically are 5 different types of flood advisories that are issued by the Weather Service. Everything from urban and small stream advisory, which we do get here in the Memphis area when we get some fairly heavy rain that is not really flash flood warning criteria, but where you get some underpasses and low spots that start to pond or get kind of excessive water in areas that are typically prone to flooding, but you don't have massive curb water over the curbs and all that kind of stuff in widespread areas. That urban and small stream advisory product is used around here. And then just a small stream flood advisory. Out west, they have this arroyo and small stream advisory, flood advisories, hydrologic advisories. You see they all have their own criteria. And to the public, it's confusing, I think. And that's what they're seeing as well, is that there's, the public doesn't know the difference between all this. They just know how high the water is or want to know how high the water is and how they should handle that situation. So one of the potential solutions to this is to consolidate all of those products down to just a flood advisory product, and then just describe, here are the impacts that are expected from this flood advisory. There are 3 different types of winter weather advisories. A standard winter weather advisory, a lake effect snow advisory, and a freezing rain advisory. All of those are basically, an advisory means that you have some type of weather that is expected to occur that is going to cause minor disruptions, but is not going to be something that would basically, shut the city down or something like that. It's going to cause some travel inconveniences. Roads might be a little slick, but we're not looking at major, power outages or that sort of thing. So 3 different winter advisories. We typically here only see the winter weather advisories. Obviously, we don't get lake effect snow advisories here. And then freezing rain advisory is specifically for freezing rain. Winter weather covers snow, sleet, freezing rain mix. They're considering a consolidation of that to the winter weather advisory product. And then watches, flood watches, flash flood watches, and there's one other one called a flood watch for forecast point. That's a whole separate product. But you have flood watches and flash flood watches, and both of those get issued here in the Memphis area. And it depends on how that rain is going to occur. Is it going to be 6 inches of rain over 2 days, or is it going to be potential for 2 inches in 30 minutes? One of those is a flood. One of those is a flash flood. Again, the public really doesn't probably care so much about whether it's a flash flood or a flood. They just want to know how high is the water going to get and when's it going to be there. So another consideration that they're doing. So this is one that they're actually doing surveys on right now. There are links on this page that you can actually go in and take the survey. I've done that. It doesn't take very long, 15, 20 minutes at most. And they're basically trying to understand how does the public and the emergency managers and other decision makers, how do they read the current products? What do they see in them? And given a new type of product, how does that information from there better prepare them or better advise them of the situation? So that's one of the things they're considering right now, and I think it's probably long overdue. There's no reason that we should be having 122 different products to try and figure out what is the weather going to do at my location today. So I wanted to present that, see what you guys have to say, and if you've got any comments out there that are watching tonight, you can send those to us with the WX Chat hashtag. We'll be glad to take a look at your comments as well and let us know what you think about that. So, John, Daniel, what do you guys think of bringing this down into something not quite so overwhelming?
No, I think that, one problem you have in doing that is, especially with the winter weather products. I mean, severe thunderstorm is a severe thunderstorm. A tornado is a tornado. A flood is a flood. But with winter weather, what we would consider warning criteria of this is going to be a massive winter storm, you can go 150 miles north, and that's a winter weather advisory. And I think that's the only, caveat I have. I do like just saying, hey, here's a winter weather advisory. Here's what we're expecting, much like they do now. I think it's all offices now with the tornado warnings where they say, the radar indicated or spotter, has it been seen? Here's what we think, or here's what we've been told, so on and so forth. Here are the exact hazards. I do like that, but I just think that, there's a reason there were 122 different types of advisories, and part of that has to do with geography, and another part of it. But it's funny to me that we used to have the traveler's advisory back when I was a very young kid, which covered a lot of the winter weather advisory stuff that we see today. And they said, well, no, we need to be more specific. And now we're kind of coming back full circle. I just think you have to be careful to not downplay something here. A 1/10 of an inch of freezing rain here is a crippling event, whereas in other places, although freezing rain, it's not really fair because that's the great meteorological equalizer, right? Is ice, but 2 inches of snow here is completely different than 2 inches of snow even in St. Louis. So I just think that's what they really have to look at and go, okay, or do we let, which I think they do now, the local offices kind of decide those criteria, right? Where, Memphis for a winter storm warning, I think it has to be more than 4 inches of snow in 6 hours, but you go to St. Louis and it's like more than 6 inches of snow in 6 hours. So I just think sometimes things are, and we'll get to the NWS in a minute, sometimes maybe things are best left locally to let them decide, here's what works for our group, not so much. And that's a challenge because the NWS is tasked, right, with they're the National Weather Service. But I think that that's the line that really has to be walked, that, what applies here doesn't necessarily apply in even Springfield, Illinois.
Yep, that's very true. And there was a band of snow that went through Indianapolis today, and they got 4 inches of snow in a couple of hours up there. There was no winter storm warning out for that. It was a little more than they expected. But it's not quite to that level where they would have that out. Of course, 4 inches down here is crippling. In fact, I have a graphic that shows the differences between 4 inches here and 4 inches up to the north. Let's see if I can find that thing. I believe this is it right here. Yes, of course. We have differences between the East Coast and the South and the Midwest. And 4 to 8 inches on the East Coast is diverting air traffic and flights delayed. In the South, the stores are emptied of bottled water, bread, and other emergency provisions. And in the Midwest, the roads get salted. Walking the dog becomes a bit more labor intensive. So there's there's definitely some differences between places. This is kind of an interesting graphic. I'll share this a little bit later on our page. But as you see, we basically close schools here at 1 to 4 inches, and at 36 inches, nothing is left alive except for burrowing mammals, which will eventually evolve and repopulate the region. So we just hope we never get to that level. One other thought that I'll put out, that there has also been a fair amount of discussion of at conferences and so forth recently about this whole watch warning advisory criteria. One of the options they're considering is a revamp, and there's been a lot of discussion about the way that Europe does it. And this is Meteo Alarm, which is European weather, comes from the European Meteorological Services, and they use color coding. Which there's a fair amount of interest in doing something similar to that. And basically what this does is you see all the countries are listed over here, but there's different regions that are yellow, orange, red, green. Basically, they've got kind of a 4-color coded system, and it's kind of like the stoplight. Red is bad, green is good. And so, for instance, Northeast Spain here has a yellow warning out, and then up here in the upper right, I can't hold my mouse there, but up in the upper left or above the image, you see that there's some icons there to tell you what is the type of weather that's going to be expected that's going to cause it to be a little bit worse than a green day. So we've got things like wind and rain.
We can't see your screen.
Oh, am I not sharing? I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I was sharing a minute ago. Share. Thanks for jumping in. So sorry about that. All right, there we go. Can you see it now? Okay, so here's the European system, green, yellow, orange, red, and as I mouse over the map, basically it tells me what that color means. That's a yellow in Germany there, and then above that there's some snow, there's a thermometer, and there's some lines for wind. And so those are the impacts to that region. And if I were to click in there, then it would give me the more detailed information about what that weather impact is, what type of weather is occurring. But you can kind of get a pretty quick picture. Is my day going to be good today? Is the weather green, so to speak? Or am I seeing red on my map and I need to drill down a little bit further and get the information? And those are what they call yellow warnings and red warnings and so forth. And they'll say a red warning for snow or a yellow warning for wind. Pretty kind of ingenious system, really, to describe it a little bit different way than the way we do it here, with all of the terminology and all the different criteria and everything. So another consideration. All right.
And I think the NWS is trying to get better with that. I know at least here in Birmingham, Jackson, they're doing a lot more graphics to try and explain why they're issuing a flash flood watch or a winter storm watch. And so there's the NWS communicating, and then there's how the public interprets it too, which is there could be a great gap between those two. And I think that's part of why they want to do this simplification, is so that John Q can know, oh, flooding rains, not whether it's flash flooding or river flooding. They just want to know how high the water's going to get, like we said.
Yeah, and I think that along with the graphics, and you bring up a good point, less words. I think that's the trend I've really noticed, especially on social media with the Memphis NWS, is a lot less words, a lot more pictures. Here's what it's going to look like. Here's what to expect. Do with this as you wish. Kind of here's the information. Consume it as you wish. If you want to know more, here's where to get more. If you don't want to know anything more and you just want to know, okay, I probably need to call off work tomorrow because it looks like we're going to have snow. Because again, I don't think the general public really cares if it's 3 inches or 9 inches of snow, because anything over a dusting is going to be very disruptive here. So, I think giving people all this information, they just eventually start to tune it out. One, if it's inaccurate, and two, if it's just too much, if it's overwhelming, they're not going to listen anymore.
Yeah, the merger in the last 5 years or so of social science into weather has been pretty phenomenal. There's a lot more effort being placed, and that's going to, I can tell you, that's only going to continue going to the future. That's where the higher ups in the Weather Service and in NOAA are looking at for the future of their offices is not only just providing the warning information, but making sure that people know what that means to them and how decisions should be made or could be made. Of course, there's always going to be a factor of personal responsibility in there, and you can tell people over and over again that there's going to be that the tide is going to come up so high with the storm surge that's coming in from this hurricane, and we recommend that you evacuate. But at the end of the day, it's up to the guy on the beach whether or not he wants to evacuate and take that risk, or whether he wants to or evacuate or take that risk. And so there's always that factor. But what they're really trying to do is to make sure that people have enough information to be able to make a effective decision on what they need to do, and not be caught, with I didn't know it was going to be this high in my backyard.
It struck without warning.
Yeah, millions in the path. I think that one thing the Weather Service is doing a better job of is realizing they're in the information dissemination and not interpretation business. Because scientists, like I interpret conversation about phone systems differently than either one of you guys would. And we all interpret weather data different too. So I think that the Weather Service is doing a better job, as I said, of becoming a dissemination arm instead of trying to say, hey, here's how you have to interpret this information. This is exactly what this means to you. Because people are going to make their own decisions pretty much anyway, but it's up to the Weather Service, in my opinion, to just provide all of the relevant information, and then the consumer, because even though it's a governmental to public safety issue, we're still consumers of the information. So we're going to determine how that affects our lives completely differently. And the Weather Service doesn't need to tell me, hey, this is a life-threatening, serious situation, because I'm going to make that decision. Does this threaten my life? Does it not? And the Weather Service just has to say, hey, look, we're providing the information, and it's up to the people that receive this information how they consume it.
And then working with other governmental agencies that are responsible for communications and so forth to make sure that message gets out as well. And that's where things like the wireless emergency alerts and some of those kind of things come in, is making sure that not only are they just putting the information out there into a vacuum, but that people are actually receiving that information. And the other thing that's kind of a part of that too is there also, I'm noticing a trend of getting away from, just saying, well, this is exactly what's going to happen. We're seeing more and more of a kind of a range of possibilities, because as we know, the weather is going to be fickle. It's going to do what it wants to do, no matter where I-40 is or what the GFS model says. It's got its mind of its own, and our job is to try and predict that as best as possible. But there's always a range of possibilities, and so we're starting to see more of that, even especially further north with the winter weather. But we're seeing graphics that show this is the most likely snow map. This is what we think is going to happen. But if we're wrong, it could be as high as this, or it could be as low as this. We're expecting 3 to 4 inches here in New York City. If we bust one way, it could be maybe only an inch. We're expecting you to get at least an inch. If we bust the other way, you could get 8 inches. And that at least gives people a range of options, so they can consider, well, what is my personal risk in this situation? How can I, how do I react to that? And so, if my tolerance is very low, then I'm going to look at, what is the absolute bottom end? We're going to get at least an inch. I can't handle that for my particular business or my, whatever decision I'm making. Maybe it's an outdoor wedding. The range is anywhere from 1 to 8 inches. Well, it doesn't matter if it's 1 or if it's 8. I need to move indoors. So that certainly gives a lot more leeway for decision makers to use that information in ways that they can best make their decisions.
Yeah, I like the way they do that. The only thing is people will hear what they want to hear. If they say we're going to get 3 to 4, but the max is 8 or the max is a foot, all of a sudden everyone says we're going to get a foot of snow this weekend. When no, and it goes back to personal responsibility, and it's just a cycle of communication, simplification, and I think the Weather Service is going in the right direction with it, though.
And the other thing, I mean, we're all old enough to remember and have been following this stuff long enough that whenever there's a potential winter weather event, used to what we would do for fun is we would all sit right and refresh the area forecast discussion. If it's supposed to be out at 4 a.m. and it's 4:15, we're checking our internet, making sure our internet's still up. And, we tend to forget those guys are busy, but I think that is one great thing that social media has done. And I know Memphis, I'm not sure if all of the weather service offices have somebody, but I know Memphis does and Jackson does as well, kind of have somebody dedicated to that ongoing communication, because there's nothing worse than having to wait for that 6 a.m., noon, 6 p.m. forecast or zone forecast, when, as we all know, the track of a low pressure system can change within 20 minutes. And, hey, here's what we're expecting now. And like, where I've noticed they do a great job is pulling people out of watches. When, let's say, Saturday was a severe weather day and there's a big tornado watch, and then they start dropping counties as the front moves through. That's great. And I think that's the biggest change I've seen with the weather services, being more, I guess, real time and not being, constricted to those 4 a.m. forecast discussions, 11 a.m., and then the 6 a.m. aviation discussion, we'd all refresh to see if there was some nugget in there. So I think that's great, and something that they've really done a really great job of is just, weather changes, like you said, it's moving, it's going to do what it wants to do, but having that continuous communication, I think, is critical as well.
Absolutely. Be good to some point here get a voice from the weather service in on that discussion with us as well, and kind of talk more through that and exactly what that future looks like, because there's definitely some I think some changes on the horizon. I don't know that we'll have time to get into it, and I don't necessarily know enough about the inner workings of that at this point to discuss it with a whole lot of knowledge, but there's definitely some changes that will be coming over the course of the next couple of years as to how the weather services operate. I know there is there is at least a portion of that that is driving that is relaying the impacts and helping people make decisions, and less on how many eyes do we need on the day 7 forecast to figure out if dew point's going to be 35 or 30, and more eyes on this is the current hazard, and here's how that might play out for you in your particular scenario. So that's definitely going to be one of the areas that is looked at very closely from a weather service perspective going forward. So the last thing I'll mention here, which is something I think that's of interest to whether people know about it or not, is it's been I want to say about 20-25 years since there's been a major bill that goes through Congress that has been of great benefit to the weather enterprise, the weather service being a good part of that, but also commercial weather providers and so forth. And there was an effort here in the last year with what is called the Weather Research and Forecasting Act of 2015. And pardon me while I just go ahead and pull some of these notes right out of this, because I don't want to get the details wrong on this. But it was a bipartisan bill that came through the Senate not long ago, and was actually passed without, it was just a unanimous consent vote, and that was passed just recently, and it went to the House and basically died on the vine. And the way that this is described, and I'm using an article from the Washington Post Capitol Weather Gang. If you don't read them, do. Very, very good source of information. And basically, a few of the main things that were in this bill is prioritization of accurate forecasts and warnings in collaboration with the private sector through competitive grants, increasing tornado warning lead time to as much as an hour in advance. There was a fairly major program called the Hurricane Improvement Forecast Program that was saw its funding cut in 2015, and this was to reestablish that funding. It also was going to basically give NOAA the capability to go out and purchase weather data from the private sector, which is something new, because typically we think of the Weather Service as the provider of the data that we use to put together the forecast and so forth. But if you look at things like the satellite program, where we just got a brand new satellite up into space as the previous satellites are basically going into their overtime, these satellites are past their typical use. There's definitely some gaps in there, and there was a lot of risk. But there are private, you got the companies like SpaceX and so forth that are starting to explore space, where that typically was NASA's prior kind of domain there for a long time. The same thing is happening in weather, where we've got private companies that are putting up their own satellites and getting a lot of really good information, and can do it much cheaper than the government can do it. And so this bill was going to basically allow NOAA to tap into that data for their forecasting. It also was to add a strong emphasis on seasonal forecasting. And basically what happened was that the bill, as it was written with 90 plus pages, had bipartisan support. Everybody agreed that this is something that needed to be done. It was going to pass through with very little problem. There was an amendment that was slipped in. It says it was done in 2015. There's some debate about exactly whether that's when it was done or not. But basically, the delegation from Georgia slipped in an amendment that has to do with water rights on the Chattahoochee River, which serves 3 southern states: Alabama, Georgia, and Florida. It provides drinking water to Atlanta. It says it also provides environmental viability to Apalachicola Bay and the oyster industry, and many other uses, of course, for the river water there. And there's basically a fight between those 3 states over who owns that water, and we didn't get enough water, and we're going to sue you over this, and so forth. And so they tried to put this in on this bill that everybody agreed on, which is typical in Congress, I think, for that to happen. But in this case, that little amendment basically caused this bill to not come up for a vote in the House before they adjourned last week. And so now we have what could have been a very, very positive step in the future of weather forecasting, and some of the projects that are already being worked on. I know for a fact that the expansion of tornado warnings out in time, trying to provide more lead time, is already a project has been worked on and is being worked on actively. This is one of those where you can definitely get some funding and so forth behind that to make these things happen, and that did not happen. So there's a question of whether or not that's going to be even coming back up next year. If it does, is that fight over the water in Georgia and Alabama going to be part of it? I just think it's rather interesting, and actually quite a shame that we don't get something like that, which can really provide some good benefit, and which everybody agreed to, except for this amendment, doesn't come out of Congress, because it could have been signed last week by President Obama and been a done deal. And instead, now we go through, of course, a whole change in presidential politics, as well as the new Secretary of Commerce, which is over NOAA. Who knows, how this might play out next year. So anyway, just an interesting tidbit there. And I'll also, just put a footnote on that fights over water are common. For it to be inserted into a bill like that is underhanded, I think. But we've got that going on locally. We're sitting here in Memphis on the Memphis Sands Aquifer, which is providing all of our drinking water for this region of the country. And some of that is under the state of Mississippi, and Mississippi is in a fight with Tennessee and MLGW over rights to that water. And that's, I think I checked, and that's actually gone to the Supreme Court over who the rights to the water is that important. And of course, with the drought that's been going on in California for years, a lot of fights over there over waterways between western states as well. So do you guys have any thoughts on that before we wrap up for this evening? Nope. Okay. Just an interesting tidbit, I think, and we'll definitely keep an eye on it. We'll let you know where that goes going forward. But hopefully, we can somehow get the bill through that would give a big boost, I think, to the weather industry, and be able to continue programs like the GOES-R satellite program that just got off the ground literally a couple of weeks ago, and we'll be reaping the benefit of that for years and years to come. So,
wasn't the NEXRAD what got us NEXRAD? Wasn't that the last really significant piece of, or not NEXRAD? Maybe what got kind of dual pole started? Wasn't that the last really significant piece of weather legislation we've had. Like, I don't remember the last significant piece. I know it had to be the early to mid 90s, but
the early 90s, and it was the NexRad program was already funded by that point. They were deploying the radars, but they're called 88Ds because of the year 1988, which was when they intended on putting those out. Of course, it took till the late 90s to get all of those across the country. But that one could have had the early starts of the dual pole program, perhaps in there. It might have. I think that might have been a little bit later, but. I will continue to say, as long as it remains true and beat the drum, that the Weather Service and the services they provide is the best deal for your tax dollar, bar none. Each individual in the United States, if you were to take the National Weather Service budget and divide it by the number of people in the U.S., we're literally paying less than $5 a year for the services of the National Weather Service. And you are not going to find a better deal out there, and they deserve the funding that is needed to be able to advance the science, to be able to get the models into a scenario where we're not fighting with the Europeans over who's got the better model. We have enough resources here in the United States to be the leaders of the world from a science perspective, from a weather forecasting perspective, and from a perspective where we don't have people that are going, that storm hit without warning. I didn't know it was coming here. We should be able to solve that problem.
Yeah, and real quick, and I do have people occasionally ask me, well, because I am, not to get political, but I'm a privatization guy. I think privatization is generally a good thing, but you can't privatize public safety because then you put profitability on public safety, and you just can't do that. You can't say, okay, and I'm not picking on them, but Weather Channel, AccuWeather, here you go. You guys fight it out and determine what the best, who's going to have the most viewers, and that's how we save lives. And that you just can't do that with the weather enterprise. You can't just throw it all out to private. There has to be some sort of public, almost watchdog component to it.
Yep, definitely. And that's why we pay taxes, and I'm glad to pay taxes for that sort of thing. Certainly is a benefit to me and to all of those that I'm surrounded by. So we'll wrap it up from here. I'll ask you guys if you have any closing comments, and let us know where we can find you. If people have any follow-up questions or just want to talk with you a little bit more about any things we talked about tonight. John, you want to close us out and say goodnight?
Yeah, appreciate you having me on. At Tiger John M. I'm happy to talk about the weather or Tigers Tonight, the only podcast dedicated to Memphis Tigers football. I love picking on Daniel about that. But at Tiger John M on Twitter, John Maddox on Facebook. It's wintertime, so just keep in mind that it will be cold and it will precipitate at some point this winter. Despite the headlines we've seen from national media of cold and snow to overspread northern U.S. Yep, that's what we call wintertime here. So find a good local source and quit relying on crap apps and national headlines to help drive your decisions.
Good point. Daniel, thanks for being on again this evening. I appreciate it. You want to let folks know where they can find you?
Yeah, I am at Daniel Gafford on Twitter. Follower beware. I tweet about weather, wrestling, what my girls say to me, what they say to each other. But looking forward to the front crashing through Saturday night. It's going to be a rude awakening for some folks on Sunday morning.
Yeah, definitely. And I know those folks out there that that are looking forward to a crash in temperatures are also looking forward to something being on the ground when they wake up Sunday morning, other than just frozen tundra. So, or a water from overnight that's starting to freeze on them, flash freeze in the morning. So we'll have to keep that in mind too. So I appreciate those of you who joined tonight. I'll throw in one last plug. I have with me, you see here, this is the 2017 MemphisWeather.net calendar. I have two left. Go on to MemphisWeather.net. There's a link on the front page. They are $15. I don't make anything on it. Just good service for you guys. And it's got some good information in it. It's got some little weather events and facts and stuff as you go through the calendar and you realize that, oh, July 22nd, that was when Hurricane Elvis was. And it comes up on your calendar, and some great pictures by folks like you guys out there who are great followers. Appreciate those and sending us your pictures. We've got those in the calendar this year. So you can order the last couple. Get them while they're hot on the website. I am Erik Proseus, and you can find me at MemphisWeather.net, the number 1, because we are the first source you should be checking on for your local weather here in Memphis. And of course, follow us on Facebook, and we'll be blogging about this upcoming Arctic blast here this weekend and all the events that take place throughout the wintertime. Appreciate everybody joining, and we'll do it again sometime soon. Good night.